Good evening, everybody. My name is Jörg Süßenbach. Maybe it's a little bit too loud. I'm the director of the Goethe-Institut, and I want to welcome you warmly here in Boston, in Beacon Street, in the Goethe-Institut, and all our guests online. We're so happy to cooperate for a second time with AGNI. We had, I think it was 24th of March, a very moving and touching event here with Ukrainian and American authors. And so it was easy for us to say yes when we thought about doing another thing. This is an important event as well. The new launch, the spring launch of the new AGNI edition, I think the 95th. During your Jubilee season, the 50th. And I think reasons enough to cooperate. And so we want to say, it's wonderful that you're here, AGNI, the whole AGNI team, and I'm looking forward to this event tonight. I want to pass over to Sven Burkerts, and he will introduce us in the evening. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Sven Burkerts. I co-edit AGNI with Bill Pierce, and we've had so many different ways of commemorating issues. In the last few years, they've been mainly virtual, but back in the day when we stood up in front of people, we sort of alternated sort of welcoming, introducing the event, the new issue, and welcoming people. This year, it seems like just a heightened, intensified version of that, because we're not only commemorating an issue, we are commemorating our 50th year of continuous publication, which translated into human terms is we're probably celebrating about our 100th birthday, something like that. Especially if you have 2 issues a year, we're sort of on that track. So there's been a little bit of, I guess we've all become accustomed to certain glitches and delays in the world economy on many fronts. And for that reason, partly as well, the issue, which we usually have on hand in abundance, is not quite in our hands yet. But Bill spent most of the day to hear tell getting the new issue, at least, table of contents and everything that's in it up on our website. And it's also available there for order should you really feel like jumping in and getting it fast. So we have 6 readers introduced by 6 masthead editors. And I'm just going to do the quick so everyone see who we're expecting. Bill Pierce will introduce essayist Alex Marzano-Lesnevich. Esteban Rodriguez will introduce poet Yasmine Ameli. Mary O'Donoghue will introduce Mariana Villas-Boas, fiction. There will be an interlude with a world legendary bandura player. And the bandura is a sort of, essentially a Ukrainian instrument. I think that's obviously an apt time to introduce both, a feeling of the land, its music, I think it's melancholy probably, and maybe some of its celebratory sounds as well. He'll be followed by Shuchi Saraswat will introduce Andrew Zubiri, essayist. Jennifer Kwan Dobbs will introduce the poet Lynn Emanuel, and I will be back at the end to introduce fiction writer David Maloney. So, Bill.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. The Fact of a Body was my first encounter with the work of Alex Marzano-Lesnevich. The book received, among other honors, a Lambda Literary Award, the Chautauqua Prize, and the Grand Prix Les Lectrices L, and was translated into 11 languages. It fuses the kind of true crime exploration that Truman Capote pulled off in Cold Blood with the best of literary memoir and self-examination. Their essay in AGNI 95, Everything and More, has given me a closer sense of the sources of the simultaneous precision and inventiveness that characterize Alex's writing. They write in the essay about the work of finding or choosing words, not while writing, but while living. In this case, while trying to reach openness and accuracy with another trans person. In the naming, they write, I conjure myself into being. This everything up for grabsness of language is a condition of transness. The everything up for grabsness of language is a condition of the best writing, so who better to turn to for it than one aware of those high language stakes as a condition of day-to-day life. Alex Marzano-Lesnevich has received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Eccles Center at the British Library, the Heinrich Böll Foundation, and the Maine Arts Commission. A portion of their forthcoming second book, Both and Neither, was chosen for the Best American Essays 2020. Welcome, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction, Bill. I have to say, I'm so honored to be kicking off this event. I've been with all these amazing writers and editors. I have been such a fan of AGNI for so many years, and to have work in it now is truly a dream come true. So thank you. I'm going to read to you from the start of Everything and More. As a child, I wasn't particularly interested in the idea of treasure. I suppose I didn't believe back then that there was anything so marvelous to be found. Instead of pirates who spent all their time searching, I thrilled to the story of Billy the Kid, who spent his on the run, hiding. Only years later, when my nieces and nephews fell under the spell of pirates, and under their parents' direction, I bought plastic boy pirates with green and blue parrots on their shoulders, and plastic girl pirates, their hats in anachronistic hot pink, their cutlasses shiny as jewelry. Did I wonder what I'd been missing? The kids were so boisterous, so loud, so together as they brandished their swords. They understood instantly that treasure was what they sought. With fat black crayons, they dotted serpentine paths across a construction paper map. Without ever having been told, somehow without ever having been explicitly taught, they knew that X marked the treasure's spot. Not a single real pirate's treasure map has ever been found, though. Treasure maps in general, yes. The oldest is the Copper Scroll, made of metal and thought to have been hammered thin and inscribed between 50 and 100 AD before corroding in the Dead Sea. The scroll lists 60 places where buried gold and silver might purportedly be found, but 2 millennia later, none ever has been. The scroll remains a tintype of hope, a facsimile of yearning. That the letter X could mark a destination appears to date not to maps, but to storytelling, a play by J.M. Barrie, the author of Peter Pan. Even Captain Kidd, the man thought to be most responsible for the legends of buried treasure, was not a pirate himself, but a pirate hunter. He was executed amid rumors of vast buried treasures never found. Of the maps he was said to leave behind too, there's still no trace. Over the phone, a boy tells me now, his voice newly husky with hormones, that he wants to kiss me on the spot where each week I plunge a fine gauze needle into my skin. A boy. We are both of us well past 30 in this story, me further past than him, both well into becoming, but what is the word I should use? A man? It seems too settled, too definite for either of us. We whose soft bodies are still changing from the cold pierce of those needles, the oily elixir we plunge slowly in, faintly gold where light catches the syringe. I listen to his words and I imagine drawing a little X on the soft fat around my belly button, an inch to the left of it, to guide first the metal point and then his mouth. We use boy to name each other. Dear boy, we say, good boy, sweet boy, offering shelter we never had. Fuck boy, offering joy. Testosterone brings the breakouts of puberty, flesh suddenly pockmarked as though with our own histories. Sometimes, too, it brings heat that crawls over me in a flush, as though a flash of a future I've turned away from. Sitting at a writing desk where I can hear the waves, I think about how they are the heartbeat of both the moon and the ocean. The desk rests in a hut along the beach. The ocean steps from my door. The world is thick in a pandemic that seems to crawl and swell, to recede in one place as it ravages another. Unable to concentrate, unable to do anything really, except try to resist returning to the bedroom, where the boy is only as far as my phone and the testosterone vial glints where I've left it within sight on my dresser, a harbinger so longed for I cannot bear to put it away. I read an essay collection about doom, Lisa Gabbert's The Unreality of Memory. In it, she cites writer-philosopher Timothy Morton, quote, "For every object in the universe, there is a genuinely future that is radically unknowable." Morton is talking about what he calls a hyper-object, an object, quote, "massively distributed in time and space relative to humans, an entity that is too big and too slow in its becoming for us to fully see or comprehend it." So the ocean, I think, is a kind of hyper-object. And although I am sick of thinking about gender, maybe it is too. The other people who have taken refuge in this shore town misgender me constantly. And I find myself wanting to brandish my license like a sword. Here it is, I imagine saying, legitimized by the state. And maybe you will acknowledge that more than you will acknowledge me. Under lamination, my identity is small enough to fit inside a single letter, X. In the book-length essay, Trans Care, theorist and professor Hill Malatino points out that these constant misgenderings are not only the violence I feel them to be every time, but become part of the story of a trans person's life, part of the narrative carried around with them. This means, I think, that the constant social negations of the self becomes, paradoxically, part of the self. In each moment of their doing, the misgenderings become part of the immensity of the past, which is to say they become part of my present and of the future. They stretch me beyond any static fact of existence. They become part of the hyper-object of me. Each day right now seems cast in an immensity I can't quite see. At my desk, I stare at my computer screen and I try to make a book that doesn't exist yet, build a world that doesn't exist yet. I watch the ocean and I try to comprehend that whole skyscrapers could fit inside of it, that there are worlds underneath this one and above this one, and if reports on nano-universes are to be believed, within this one, but I'll never know. Yesterday, walking along the beach before sunset, I saw a shell speckled with the remnants of tiger stripes, a chunk of it already missing, and I wondered at the many layers of what to me was unknown. The type of shell, the animal it had harbored, that animal's birth and death and becoming, what story the artifact was evidence of. And then the future, the way any geologic sense of time will ground that shell down to sand, but only long after I myself am rot. Thank you.
Hello, y'all. My name is Esteban Rodriguez, and I am Associate Poetry Editor. Greetings from Austin. In Yasmine Ameli's poem Inheritance, a day of fishing becomes a chance to look deeper into the past and piece together fragments of familiar relationships that otherwise would have remained lost. This small moment becomes a profound episode into the nature of one's purpose in the world. And at the end, we see a speaker so aptly reflecting on their grandfather and his relationship with his son, saying, "Inside us both huddles a child lost at the fairgrounds. They await a small God of their own making to arrive." Whether at a river fishing the Blue Ridge Mountains, a classroom where the Pledge of Allegiance is being recited, or being guided back to bed by a brother who becomes much more than a brother, as in Ramin's Weather Machine, first published in issue 93 of AGNI. Ameli's poetry grants us the opportunity to avoid waiting for these small gods and make meaning for ourselves. With lines that are harmonious yet conversational, and with subtle yet vivid descriptions of a diverse array of landscapes, Ameli's poetry sings of intergenerational journeys with speakers that seek to more fully understand not only themselves, but those they keep close to their heart. Ameli is a biracial Iranian-American writer from and currently based outside of Boston. Her poems and essays have been published or are forthcoming in Poetry Magazine, Plowshares, The Sun, The Rumpus, Crazy Horse, and elsewhere. It is an honor to welcome Yasmine to the stage.
Hi. Thank you so much for that introduction. That was really kind. Tonight, I'm going to be reading 4 poems. The first one is part of a series called Bedtime Story. This is one of 12. Saeed goes missing. 40 years later, my mama tells me his poems got into the wrong hands. It is the night before our flight to Tehran. We pack belongings into suitcases on her bed. The wrong hands are either the old regime's Savak or the new regime's Basij. Either way, Saeed is dead now. My mama pulls my journal from the pile and flips through its poems, then shows me a photograph she has saved. Beneath its glossy finish, Saeed remains 18. It is always the year of his death. I trace with my pinky finger the image of his parted lips, thin and delicate. His lashes are so long, I want to press mine against his. Promise me, my mama says, do not become a writer. The second poem is I Pledge Allegiance to the Republic. Every morning, the public school chooses a student to lead us in patriotic worship over the intercom. I stand before my classroom flag and count my heartbeats. At recess, I draw stars and stars. We are one nation under God. I crayon within the lines. When the school announces the annual poetry contest, I write a poem for the republic for which the flag stands. Last year, I wrote a poem about the country that my mama calls back home. I did not win. This year, I know better. My poem is chosen. The local paper prints my name on the front page. The school teacher makes me line leader. In the gymnasium, the entire school sits and sweats in neat rows. The assembly is televised on the local channel and we wave to the cameraman. We sing the Star-Spangled Banner. We sing, you're a grand old flag. When it is my turn to stand, I smoothen my red dress. The title of my poem is We Are as Free as the Wind. I am 10. I recite my lines. I believe them. This time I won't make a big noise with the mic. Okay. This poem is called, we title a Google Doc, Winter Getaway. Sheets, towels, wedge of goat milk soap, orange blossom water and first aid kit, L'Arabe du Futur, which I read to you in stilted college French. Your accent is less American, you assess, more like my father's. He fled to Syria during the war, fell in love in France with a French girl. You were born in the Alps. I add to the list flour, the really big pot on the top shelf. You speak of aunts in Tardis, cousins down the coast, countryside farmland, a grandmother in homes. Reread the headlines later. A message to Iran, Biden bombs Syria, be careful. While you shower, I draft the poem of a woman who worries over her beloved's visa. You, chemist in a lab, You experiment with ketamine to treat veterans with PTSD, record results in confidential notebooks, report your progress at equal intervals to the bald sunburnt man at the Department of Defense. I draft the poem of a woman whose taxes bomb your father's childhood refuge. If you cross the border, you might not cross it back. The embassy will or will not stamp your paperwork. I will always ripple down my length at the sight of you emerging from shower stall steam, soft, naked, but for a bath towel over the hips. When you explain yourself, I hear ketamine, horse tranquilizer, quench, and distill. In bed, you once said, I don't know who will benefit from my research in the end. I suggested the soldiers. You suggested the army recruiter, equipped with the new false promise of a smooth return to civilian life. It might have been otherwise, the poems of our lives. And this last poem is also one of a series. It's called At the Persian Language Program. By checking this box, I acknowledge that the views and information presented are my own and do not represent the state. I acknowledge that I checked the box. I acknowledge that the check in the box cut me a check for tuition and a living stipend. I acknowledge that when I deposited said tuition and said living stipend into my checking account, I participated in the military-industrial complex. I acknowledge as a participant in the military-industrial complex that the state invests in my learning of Persian with the explicit hope, although not contractual obligation, that I will invest my life in its national security interests. I acknowledge that I am a participant in the military-industrial complex, even as I critique the military-industrial complex. In critique of complex, I acknowledge the box I check it again and again. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Mary O'Donoghue, Senior Fiction Editor at AGNI. I've had the intense pleasure of working closely and thinking alongside two of tonight's fiction readers, David Maloney, whose emotionally inundating story you'll hear from later, and Mariana Villas-Boas, my neighbor on this screen, and my neighbor, I suspect, in some other kin-feeling kinds of ways. Mariana Villas-Boas is a Portuguese immigrant currently living in Zurich, Switzerland. In 2014, she won the FNAC New Talents Award in Portugal for short fiction. Her fiction has been published or is forthcoming in American Core Data and Apple Valley Review. Her AGNI story, More Than You Can Run With, is, in its author's words, a political exploration of parenting in our times. And Mariana is currently working on a collection of short stories concerned with female immigration and identity. I'm sorry, I realize the screen is becoming very strange and I'm evaporating into the darkness. More Than You Can Run With moved, between assistant editors Ariel Courage and Ben Black before it came to me. They were much taken with its taut, suspenseful narrative. On first reading, the story's uneasy, queasy atmosphere of displacement and transit pressed very, very hard on all the levers and pedals that I can and cannot drive with. And I hurtled along with the train in which so much of the story unfolds. But I think unfold is the wrong verb here, because Mariana Villas-Boas is too ethically rigorous and complicating a writer to allow unfolding, a simple unfolding. I think her story creases and it crimples and it snags on all of the narrator's dreads and dislikes. And as she said to me over email, when she and I began a really lovely editing dialogue, she said, you might not agree with the narrator, but you can't entirely turn her back on her. And when you get your issue of AGNI and read her story, you'll know what I mean. Please welcome Mariana Villas-Boas.
Thank you so much for that very thoughtful introduction, Mary. It was a pleasure also working with you to edit this story. And it's a pleasure to be awake in the middle of the night here in Zurich to share it with you. This is the opening to my story, More Than You Can Run With. The cut on my cheek stings, and I'm reminded that life is dangerously unpredictable. My son runs circles around me, and I stand small in the vast vault of the Milano Centrale train station, with its stone drapes and eagles, wreaths of laurel, I guess they are, in their craggy talons, which is just as the architects intended, to make us citizens feel small and helpless, in need of the state's fatherly protection, which sounds nice right about now, I won't lie. There's been a switch, and our homeward bound train won't be leaving from the platform printed on our Swiss ticket, because that platform has a train bound for Bergamo, not Zurich. And what if I hadn't double checked? And why do the people waiting with us for announcements seem unsurprised by any of it? The whole thing is too unpredictable, when what I need, the only thing really, is predictability. That's the key to avoiding a crisis. In the event of a meltdown, I have no extra arm to carry my Daniel boy, not with our suitcase and my overflowing handbag. And hadn't I been warned just this very morning? The refugee woman on the news comes rushing back to me as Daniel shoved a pastry into his mouth at breakfast, and I stirred the dirty foam at the bottom of my cappuccino, my mind empty. She warned me from the TV screen that you should never have more children than you can run with, meaning in case you need to flee an attack. And she sobbed bitterly at the mention of the child she left behind as she ran with 2 others in her arms. The cut on my cheek is thin and straight as a line, fresh from this morning when Daniel threw a heavy dinosaur at my head when I was picking up clothes off the floor of our holiday rental. He has these impetuous gestures sometimes, and the only warning you get is the wild sparkle in his eye. But he wasn't even upset, and there was no obvious malice in it, just the need to test the boundaries of safety, a much worse thing in my view. Served me right for buying the expensive German-made dinosaur instead of the hollow Chinese one he'd wanted. It's annoying, but expected in these poorly managed countries that they would take so long to update the train platforms. And now a crowd is gathered around the information screen. Annoying, but a part of me is thankful for the opportunity to put down my heavy bag, brimming with toy horses, snacks, and card games. Because here I am, accepting that to be a mother is to carry overflowing bags through life. Bags that contain a remedy for every possible scenario until the straps permanently indent my shoulders, curving my back. And I recall images of Jesus carrying the cross in church and feel, maybe inappropriately, that this is not unlike that. There is a razor-sharp dinosaur tail at the bottom of my bag to prove it. Down there somewhere with a book I probably won't be reading, but carry with me, hopefully, like a condom nearing expiration. I rarely sleep alone. Daniel crawls into bed with me most nights. But when was the last time I slept with another adult body? It may be why I sleep so badly. What isn't in my bag is Daniel's passport. I don't know how I forgot to bring it, but I forgot to bring it. And now I'm stuck both hoping I'll get questioned at the border, as you'd hope any kidnapping pedophile would be, and praying for the luck of getting through unnoticed. I'm worried about having good luck and worried about having bad luck, and no outcome seems particularly rewarding here, insofar as my anxiety about the world goes. My stomach can vouch for that. Trains aren't like planes, where your bags are scanned and your ID checked before boarding, and they aren't like cars that are stopped at the border with Germany to scrutinize goods brought into the country, which the Swiss Border Patrol do and give a hard time to people breaking the rules, deservedly so, in my opinion. They are, all of them, trains, planes, and automobiles in between places, a bubble slightly apart from reality. But trains are unique in their poor controls, poor to the point of reckless. Trains treat borders like lines drawn to be crossed, just like the line between life and death is a line drawn to be crossed. What gets me really agitated, though, is when I think about the mountains on the Swiss border with Italy, which are only loosely marked on a map and not at all in the actual terrain. Half the mountain is Swiss, the other not. But where that exact line lies remains confoundingly unspecified, unimaginable. But where something begins and something ends is not always clear. My Swiss passport would surely be enough to quash any further inquiry into my situation with Daniel. But even if, God forbid, some out to get me drunk on power Italian poliziotto gave me a hard time, there's no doubting Daniel and I are mother and child. No two people with different age and gender could be more identical than we are, as if genetics had forgotten to get creative. Just look at those dark blue eyes and loose blonde curls, not to mention that jawline, as good as any DNA test. Still waiting for the platform announcement, I glanced down from the display screen, and Daniel isn't at my feet, and my chest tightens violently, and I'm about to call out his name, but then see him squatting on the ground a ways off, playing with his Hot Wheels in a cone of sunlight pouring down from the great hall skylights, and the light holds him there so menacingly, its long fingers weaving through my little boy's locks like a snake in the grass. Thank you.
Gained so much from being able to gather like this across these distances. This is astonishing, and we're not even halfway through. So this is something that these last few years have given us, the chance to open out from in-person Boston events only to this hybrid model. And so I just want to thank the Goethe-Institut Boston once again for their extreme generosity in inviting us, celebrating our 50th anniversary with us, setting absolutely no rules for what we would gather and what we would do here today, letting this just be an AGNI event shared with Goethe-Institut. Thank you to all of you. The videos online of Julian Kytasty playing the bandura are a treasure map and a treasure all in one. In one of these, he describes the structure of Ukrainian folk ballads while playing. And to demonstrate the principles he's laying out, he sings his description as an improvised ballad, seemingly making it all up as he goes along. His mastery feels breathed rather than learned, and that makes sense. Julian is the third generation of his family to play the bandura. He was one of the first North American-born bandurists to tour Ukraine, and he has returned many times by invitation. Julian Kytasty is musical director of New York Bandura and founder of Bandura Downtown. We're lucky to have him tonight. Thanks for being here, Julian.
That was a little bit of a instrumental piece by way of introduction to the bandura, a piece of mine that I call travel music. And I'd like to travel a little bit today to show how the essence of this instrument, for all that it's a wonderful instrument, is in its function as an accompanying instrument for song, for poetry. It was originally an accompanying instrument of blind epic singers, Zubiri, who walked the roads of Ukraine for centuries. And their music in turn influenced the great 19th century Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko, to the point that he called his collected works, his poetic works, Kobzar. So, since he so honored the bandurists, the bandura players, I thought I would do one of his poems. This is set to music that I made for a theater piece in New York by New York Sierra Arts Group. The translation of Shevchenko's text is by our director, Viljana Tkach, and Wanda Phipps. The sky is unwashed. The waves are sleepy. And on the edges of the shore, way out there, the rushes, as if drunk, sway without wind. Lord have mercy. How long am I to languish here in this unlocked prison by this useless sea? No answer from the grass that's yellowed in the steppe. It's silent, but bows as if it's alive. It will not speak truthfully, and I've no one else to ask. That piece, that poem, was from the year 1848, the first year of Shevchenko's 10-year exile in Central Asia, where the Russian Empire, in its colonialist wisdom, decided that the greatest Ukrainian poet of his time needed to spend 10 years of his life, and the Tsar added in his own hand, forbidden to write or paint. That's one of the very few poems we have from that entire period. The Kobzari, the blind singers, the epic singers, were also not exactly favorites of imperial governments or any governments. It's because of the songs that they sang. They sang about important things. They sang about how it seems that truth is gone from the world, and falsehood, the lie, has taken the place of truth. So here's a 300-year-old ballad for the information wars of today. Нема в світі правди, правди не зіскати, бо тепер неправда стала вже правдою зватись. Що вже тепер правда стоїть у порогах, а вража неправда з панами край стола. And now truth is trampled underfoot, and falsehood wined and dined. And now truth is cast into the deepest dungeons, and falsehood sits in the councils of the powerful. Що вже тепер правду ногами топтають, а вражу неправду мед вином напувають. It's as if truth really is dead, and falsehood has gobbled up the whole world. Що вже тепер правда, правда вже померла, а вража неправда увесь світ зажерла. But those who follow the path of truth shall receive great blessings. For God is truth, and shall crush falsehood, chastise pride, raise high the temple. Бо сам Господь правда сокрушить неправду, сумирить гординю, вознесе святиню. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. My name is Shuchi, and I'm the associate editor and one of the nonfiction editors at AGNI. In Andrew Zubiri's essay, Shelf Life, we travel with him to his aunt's sari-sari store in San Andres Bukid, a district in Manila. Born and raised in the Philippines, Zubiri has lived in Germany, Washington, D.C., in the Philippines again, and now in Boston. He writes then from the diaspora, undertaking the role of family chronicler and geographic historian. The memories he shares are from when he was a young boy, alert to the daily happenings in the shop, but experiences that as an adult he can place within a social, cultural, and global context. His sentences embrace hybridity, fusing together two languages, and he is keenly aware of the shock of time, of the impermanence of even the most indomitable places. His perspective and this essay are a contemporary and exciting form of travel writing, one that resists colonialist impulses and instead sees fully and anew a place that is in fact home. Please welcome Andrew Zubiri.
Thank you very much, Shuchi, for the kind introduction. With the recent Philippine elections in mind, I'd like to dedicate this reading to Filipinos back home and around the world who continue to seek and fight for truth and justice. I'll be reading two short excerpts about my aunt's store, and I should just explain that I call my aunt Mommy. The essay is called Shelf Life. The sari-sari store started small. As Daddy and his crew worked the sewing machines, Mommy occupied a corner of the shop where she sold a small assortment of cigarettes by the piece, snack foods, and canned sardines and sausages. One day after lunch, she packed 3 small plastic bags of leftover sauteed bitter gourd and displayed them neatly on a plate. They sold right away. The next day, she expanded her menu to include pancit, stir-fried rice noodles with vegetables, and sopas, a creamy chicken noodle soup. The following week, there was dinuguan, a chocolate-colored stew made from pig's blood, sinigang, a sour soup with meat and vegetables, and menudo, a tomato-based stew with diced pork, potatoes, carrots, and raisins. She took out a loan to expand her inventory, setting aside 100 pesos each day to make sure she would be able to pay it back. The store's variety of goods grew, overtaking the suits, shirts, and skirts. In the late 80s, imported ready-to-wear clothing flooded the local market. The sign above the window front was replaced, and Cramelton Tailoring gave way to Cramelton Store. As our family grew, we moved out and rented the 2-level shack behind Mommy and Daddy's house, which they had previously used as a warehouse. As a child, I didn't feel our home was small because Mommy's house and the store felt like an extension of ours. Living near the train tracks imposed a soundtrack on my early life. Then, as now, the first train's deafening whistle at 6 a.m. serves as the community's alarm clock. Every hour or so, as the train hurtles to the next station, the crescendo comes and goes, warning residents living in shanties on public land to clear the tracks. We raised our voices or left conversations hanging as the train approached. then pick them back up as the sound trailed off. 3 other stores served the short stretch of Augusto Francisco where we lived at the time, but none flourished like Ramilton store. It displayed a palette of canned goods, packages, and sachets in perpetual response to the flux of supply and demand. One time, it was even scouted as a potential setting for a TV commercial. It was a convenience store, a school supplies shop, and takeout food stall in one. Anything smaller with less variety was just an amateur attempt. Anything larger and nicer was a full-fledged supermarket. And anything with air conditioning that stayed open for 24 hours was a 7-Eleven. The customers had it easy. Pabili, pay, repeat. The other side of the trade was a bit more involved. Mommy had to negotiate the labyrinthine layout of racks, shelves, and cabinets, keep tabs on product inventory and prices, and live in a house that doubled as a warehouse. At age 6, I worked part-time behind the cash drawer, handling the sale of candy, with a piece or two as compensation. Mommy and Daddy would slip the larger bills under a tray that held coins, the only money they allowed me to touch. I developed my own technique to tell which products were sensitive to price fluctuation. Yellow labels secured with rusting thumbtacks were old, while labels pinned with shiny gold tacks signaled a recent price hike. An oil-stained desk was the store's centerpiece. Depending on the time of day, it served a dual purpose. On one corner sat large tubs of cooking oil, mayonnaise, and peanut butter, ready for repackaging and retail selling. When it was time to eat a meal, we gathered around the desk and turned empty plastic crates on their sides to double as chairs. There was rarely a large spread, but there was always enough food to go around. Living the first few years of my life surrounded by store supplies, coins, bills, and 2 mothers, I never noticed that our family was occasionally hard up, even though the plastic bags, cardboard boxes, and rice sacks left a distinct stale odor that hung in the air. It was the smell of the store. It was the smell of home. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Kwan Dobbs, and I am Senior Poetry Editor of AGNI. I'm deeply honored to introduce tonight the poet Lynn Emanuel, who I've been fortunate to read for nearing 3 decades, first as a student in 1995 at Oklahoma State University, encountering her book, Hotel Fiesta, and lately in 2022 as AGNI's poetry editor, a poetry editor riveted by her poem, Disappearance Nativity, which my colleagues and I are elated to include in issue number 95. Lynn's most recent title is The Nerve of It, Poems New and Selected, winner of the Academy of American Poets Lenore Marshall Poetry Prize. And her work spans 5 collections, with the 6th one on the way, and is the nourishment I seek whenever my imagination feels pinched. She sizes up fashionable anxieties, whether it's that 80s binary of language versus metrical verse, they're both formalisms, Lynn observes, or that 90s prohibition against self-consciousness. And she vigorously returns to brass tacks. What is a book, an image, a poem? What more can they do? What else can they enact? These are not playful questions. They are the questions, and therefore the most powerful and personal. Following the leak of the Supreme Court's draft majority opinion to overturn Roe v. Wade, I've returned to disappearance nativity with fresh urgency and gratitude for Lynn's long project. She frees language from mannerisms that would normalize banalities, deaden our senses, and deploy gendered, racial, and class violence. Her sharp, subversive imagination engages readers in an experience of freedom that we always need, and the possibility of which we hope endures. Please welcome the poet and original, Lynn Emanuel.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you for that eloquent introduction. I would like to begin by reading the poem that was published in AGNI 95. And I want to say how delighted I am to be here for the launch. My new manuscript is entitled Transcript of the Disappearance, Exact and Diminishing. Disappearance, nativity. I was a garden, and you, my gardener. I was a house, you, my lodger, lodged beneath my heart. My heart, you were the fist that knocked, and I would not answer. You starved me down until a glance could pass straight through me as I lay on the obstetrician's vinyl couch under a shroud that stank of Clorox. They mined for you, their probes slick with the scentless oils of technicians, for whom I must be opened, peeled back, forced to look. And I did, as I was told, not relax exactly, but give myself up to your co-conspirators who dug you out of the blankness of my flesh, parted the dark waters, and suddenly you came forth, a smudge of white against the ultrasound's blackness. You floated, spectral and thickly pale, a magnolia in a bowl, an elegant centerpiece. You had no heart, were as minimal as a Mobius strip, but you had style. Even your dying was oddly stylish, the way you resembled more and more each day a comet. The wan tail of you grew longer, more tenuous on the screen, and I saw you calmly and with endearing gravity take a nosedive until the light blinked out, and I was no longer a house for an uninvited guest, nor a heaven for a Ghazi's constellation. The screen went dark, and I came back to myself. I was no longer a ghost's ghost. I was myself again. I was flesh and living. And I'd like to just read the poem from which I've taken the title of my new manuscript. It's called, the title of the poem is Plague's Monologue. I erased the world so nothing could find it, snuffed out the roses, red and hot as the snouts of bombs, repealed the polar ice cap, even that fat oxymoron, the industrial park, has disappeared. And the last few words huddled together like bees in a hive, buzzing and plotting. I cut their throats with the scythe of a comma, I turned the snout of my pen against them. I saved by erasing the streets and the people. Let them be overgrown with absence. I don't care. There is no limit to my appetite, my lust, my zeal for emptiness. But I know you, and you have kept a transcript of the disappearance. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Our last reader tonight is David Maloney. David teaches creative writing at Southern New Hampshire University. He's the author of Barker House, which is a narrative of sections drawing deeply, I think, from a period of his life, 4 years that he spent as an officer at the Hillsborough County Department of Corrections. And it's tough life and it's tough language. It's the subject matter. So what intrigued me when I was looking around a little bit, I found an interview that David had with interviewer Ron Slate, in which he just came out with that little bit saying that, in fact, he really enjoys lyrical prose. And that suddenly helped me understand why I was having such a strong reaction. The story that's in the current issue is called The River is a Man. There's something about the bringing together, I wouldn't call it the collision, but rather a kind of a weave of a momentum-driven and fairly street-level narrative of unrequited love, ultimately. But there's that sound of the lyric, sensibility running through it at the very same time. And the reaction I was having was thinking that I was trying to think very hard what I have read and remembered that gets in so close to the sort of experiential matter of being young, being adolescent young, being a young adolescent male. It's not just the story, it's not just the subject matter. It's so much to do with its pace, its syncopation, its observations, with the way that it perceptually stays so close to the level at which somebody of that age, as I recollect, takes in the world. It's not written from above or outside, it's sort of expanded and given to you from within. It's quite an amazing story. And so let me welcome up David Maloney.
Thank you for those words. And thank you to Mary O'Donoghue for seeing something in the story, and for Bill Pierce taking us home. This is The River is a Man. Peter and Alex were completing the transaction, standing just outside the brush that pierced through and bearded the chain link fence that lined the lot. The grass was thin where I knelt, just inside the fence, but taller than me, tips like golden feathers. Some great bird had dropped magic seed long ago. I followed Peter through the hole in the fence. If you didn't know where it was, you wouldn't find it. The further away from the alley we got, the darker it became. We could make this trek in pitch black, but sometimes I got the feeling that we didn't know where we were going, that the place we had been in by day wasn't the same as the one at night. A few hundred yards from the lot, the tall grass ended and the wetlands began. The trees were overgrown and sick looking, some so feeble we could push them over and send them for a ride. Just a few feet in was a clearing, a circle of a half dozen old crumpled pillars, once inscribed but now faded. Guarding the old cemetery were big rocks and we sat on them. Peter opened the cider jack with his skull Zippo lighter and passed it to me. What were you talking to Alex about? I asked. The mosquitoes started biting once we got sedentary. There's a party at Janessa's next week. Peter was eating fries at manic speed, wiping the grease and salt on the rock where he sat. I drank the cider, the sweet fizz made my eyes water, but I turned away from Peter and looked into the trees. He probably couldn't make out my entire face anyways. She told me I had a nice chest. Peter tossed the fries into the trees. They were only a ploy to get Alex out in delivery anyways, but I would have eaten some. He stood up and drank from the bottle, head tilted to the night sky, and pulled up his shirt with the other. His skin looked so white against the darkness, but his chest looked like mine, flat, except I had pimples, constellations of them. I liked to pinch them, watch the black plug draw out and curl, roll them between my fingers. They'd scab and I'd pick at them in class. Sometimes I bled through my shirt and it'd get stuck to my skin. The quicker I drank, the less I cared about the mosquitoes and ivy rash. Peter talked about Janessa, how she squirmed when they kissed, rode his knee, made him cream his pants. Just a big nut right on my thigh. You should have seen me trying to get past her mom. I opened my second cider. 3 was my max and I was pretty toasted that night. She noticed it? Nah, he said. I hated when he talked about Janessa, the things they did, and I wanted to kiss him to get his mind off her. But I'd learned to wait for Peter to make the first move. After he finished his cider jack, he flung it in the direction of the fries and scooted to the rock next to me. He stuck his nose into my cheek and I smelled the fries in his breath. I turned into him and he kissed me hard, too hard. Our front teeth grinded together. I pulled back. Easy, you in a rush? He popped off the rock and made his way into the middle of the clearing. You ever wonder who's buried here? My dad says Native Americans. Indians didn't use gravestones, dummy. He stomped on the ground under a pillar and it made a thump as if it were hollow, as if it proved his point. My dad is usually right. What if we dig them up, he said. Stupid idea. He knelt in the dirt and picked up a thin, flat rock the size of a dinner plate and started scraping the ground. You're asking for a curse. What could a curse do that hasn't already been done to me? Please, you've been blessed. Rich parents, new sneakers every season, a PlayStation with Game Shark, height, dog without dandruff. I took another sip and my throat burned. The cider tasted like expired apple juice. Peter had dug down a foot, the dirt looser, each scoop bringing up more than the last. You're going to be cursed. Curses don't exist. You think Indians are buried with headstones and caskets? You probably believe in God. I do, and you're going to hell for what you're doing. I felt tears coming, but didn't want to cry. Judge me, I don't care. I guess not. I went to stand, but my legs felt weak and my head dizzy. I didn't even like drinking, but this was our summer, Peter and I felt the momentum between us. One, I didn't want to stop, like we were a jalopy going up a hill in a snowstorm. If we hesitated, even for a second, we'd skid back down. Tonight felt different. He sometimes teased me, but not this mean. And fucking Janessa with muscular legs in a pool, neither of which I had to lure him over during the day. They might have something valuable, gold wedding rings or jewelry. I'm leaving. He stood up and dropped the rock onto the ground. He dug enough only to reveal a baby-sized casket. Stay, I'm done. I was just fucking around. It's gross. What you're doing is gross. He walked over to me like he was gonna hit me. Peter's father hit him, I knew. Miss Feely stood outside class one day with the door cracked. I sat under the clock near the door and I heard her. He said, how about I hit you? Feely was afraid of him after that, and he was suspended for 3 days. During that time, when we did a round the world contest, seeing who was the fastest at division, or traced cytoplasm, colored in the nucleolus, or read about the Revolutionary War, how the first shots were only 20 miles west of here, the Merrimack River. All I could think was that Peter wasn't safe at home. He exhaled onto my neck and smiled, then sat down again. I like a good joke. Don't take everything so seriously. You didn't think I was serious, right? I listened to the cars racing down the boulevard in the distance, the hum of them rumbling over the Rourke Bridge. The cider heated my chest, and I really liked focusing on the sound of the cars. Peter squeezed my thigh. He said, what do you like about me? I could see his feet turn in my direction. I gripped the bottle, felt its sweat run over my fingers. I didn't appreciate his aggression or what he was doing, but he was going to get what he came here for, whether he ruined my mood or not. Everything, I said. He was kissing my neck and his hand moved up my thigh. Sometimes I like to think about the Red Sox, how Carlos Quintana's batting stance looks like he's sitting, the way Greenwell can feel the ball off the monster, Seeley's swooping curve, a walk-off into the net, the roar of the crowd, how it almost makes me cry. Good, he said, as he removed my shirt. The cars droned down the boulevard, louder now, so loud I couldn't hear anything else.
Thank you to everyone who shared the stage tonight. My fellow editors, our readers, our musician. Thanks also to the many writers in the issue and in other issues who've joined us in the audience. And thanks to the audience. Thanks for being here. These are the energies that come together to constitute our issues, and in this case, to build AGNI 95. We welcome you to subscribe to the work we're doing all together. And you can also order AGNI 95 if you'd just like to try that one and come back to us later for more. We know you will. Thank you to the National Endowment for the Arts for its support, the Massachusetts Cultural Council. Thank you to the Goethe-Institut Boston. And thank you to Cynthia Ayeza, who takes care of our chat for us. And have a good night. It's great to gather in this way, virtually and actually. Good night, everybody. Thank you.